Welcome to Veiled Narrative Stories, where emotions whisper louder than words, and where fate hides behind the most ordinary moments. Tonight, we open the doors of a quiet cafe, where a single cup of coffee turns into something far more unforgettable. The clock struck 11:58 p.m., and the soft jazz playing in Café Verona faded into silence. The world outside was painted with silver rain, the kind that made streetlights shimmer like candle flames. Inside, Maya stood alone behind the counter, her delicate fingers brushing over the polished wood, lost in the rhythm of routine. The air smelled of roasted beans, warm vanilla, and the faint sweetness of caramel. Her favorite scent. She loved this hour, when the world was asleep and the cafe felt like her sanctuary. This was where her heart rested after a long day, among the soft clinking of cups and the ghosts of conversations long past. With a tired sigh, she untied her apron and reached for the light switch, but just as her fingers brushed against it, the bell above the door chimed softly. Mia turned around, startled. A man stood in the doorway, tall, elegant, and drenched from the rain. His navy blue suit clung to his broad shoulders, his hair slicked back, droplets tracing down his jawline. There was something haunting in his eyes, something that didn't belong to a stranger. "I'm sorry," Mia began gently, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "We're closed for the night." The man hesitated, his voice deep and calm, yet carrying the weight of exhaustion. "Just one last coffee," he said quietly. "Please." It was the way he said it, not demanding, not pleading, but with a quiet ache that made her heart soften. Against all logic, Mia found herself nodding. "All right," she said softly. "One last coffee." As she walked back behind the counter, the espresso machine came alive, humming its familiar tune. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air again. The man took a seat by the window, watching as rain began to fall once more, tracing soft rivers down the glass. His presence was magnetic, the kind that filled a room even in silence. He loosened his tie, exhaling deeply, as if finally letting himself breathe after years of holding it in. Mia glanced at him, curiosity flickering in her chest. "Rough day?" she asked, sliding the steaming cup in front of him. He smiled faintly, his gaze still lost in the city lights. "Rough year," he replied. "Or maybe a rough life disguised as a perfect one." Her brows furrowed slightly, intrigued. "You sound like someone who has everything, yet feels like nothing." He looked at her then, really looked, his eyes a deep, unreadable gray. "You're very observant," he said softly. "Maybe too much for your own peace." Mia smiled a little shyly. "Peace is overrated," she murmured. "I just find beauty in small things. A warm cup, quiet rain. Someone's story left half told." For a moment he was silent. Then, with a faint smile, he said, "Maybe that's what I've been missing. Something small, something real." The cafe clock ticked quietly. Outside, the world blurred into rain and reflections, and inside, two strangers shared something wordless: comfort. Mia learned his name, Ethan. He was the CEO of a multinational firm, a man people feared in boardrooms and admired in magazines. Yet here he was just a man, tired, lost, and human. He spoke of success that no longer made sense, of luxury that felt hollow, of noise that drowned every bit of peace he once knew. She listened, not out of pity but out of understanding. Because loneliness had many shapes, and his just happened to wear a suit. As the hours passed, the walls of silence crumbled. Laughter found its way between sips of coffee and quiet glances. Maya realized how easily his presence fit into her little world, like he belonged there all along. When dawn began to soften the sky, Ethan stood up, smoothing his jacket. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice carrying sincerity that words rarely hold. "For not turning off the lights." Mia smiled, her heart blooming with warmth she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," she whispered back, "for reminding me why I keep them on." He gave her a long, thoughtful look, one that lingered long after he turned toward the door. The bell chimed again as he left, and just like that, the cafe returned to silence. But something had changed. Mia turned toward the counter, and there, beneath the empty coffee cup, lay a small, cream-colored business card. It read Ethan Cole, CEO, Cole & Co. Holdings, and below that, handwritten in neat, slanted ink, "Maybe next time, I'll bring 2 cups." Her breath caught. She traced the words with trembling fingers, a smile ghosting over her lips. Outside, the first sunlight of morning spilled through the window, touching the cup he'd left behind. Mia turned off the lights at last. But her world, for the first time in years, felt beautifully illuminated. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive with grand gestures or planned meetings. Sometimes it walks in at midnight drenched in rain and simply asks for one last coffee. The next evening, Café Verona felt unusually still. The soft flicker of candlelight reflected off the glass windows, and the faint scent of vanilla danced in the air. Yet beneath all that calm, Maya's heart carried a quiet restlessness. She told herself it was just another night, just another routine. Yet, as she arranged the cups on the counter, her gaze kept drifting toward the door, as if expecting it to chime again. And then, at exactly 11:47 p.m. it did. The bell rang with the same delicate sound as before. Her breath caught. Ethan stood there once more, less formal this time, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled, and the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. He looked different, lighter, yet more real. "I wasn't sure you'd still be open," he said, stepping in as rain whispered against the glass. "I almost wasn't," Mia replied softly, her smile touching the corners of her lips. "But something told me to wait." He paused at that, his eyes studying her, as though her words had tugged at something deep inside him. "Then I suppose I'm glad you did." This time, he didn't sit by the window. He sat at the counter across from her, the distance smaller, the air thicker. "What will it be tonight?" she asked. "The same," he said. "But maybe this time, you'll join me." Her brows lifted in surprise, but she couldn't hide her smile. "You don't seem like a man who shares coffee." "Tonight," he murmured, "I'd rather share silence." So she poured 2 cups, one for him, one for herself. The steam curled between them, carrying warmth into the quiet space. They sat there, facing each other, the barista and the billionaire, bound by the stillness of midnight. Words weren't needed, their eyes did the talking. His gaze traced the soft lines of her face, the way her lashes lowered when she smiled, the faint glimmer in her eyes that made the room feel like sunrise instead of night. "Do you always work this late?" he asked finally, his tone calm, intimate. "Not always," she said, resting her chin on her hand. "But I like the quiet. It's when the world stops pretending." He leaned forward slightly. "And what do you stop pretending?" Maya met his eyes then, steady and unflinching. "That I'm content watching people chase what I never dared to." For a moment, silence hung between them. Beautiful, raw, honest. Ethan's fingers brushed the rim of his cup, his voice softer now. "What did you never chase?" She smiled faintly. "Love, adventure, the idea that someone might look at me and see something worth holding on to." Something flickered in his eyes then, a mix of admiration and regret. He wanted to tell her he saw it, right now, in every breath she took, but words felt too fragile. Instead, he said quietly, "Maybe you were just waiting for the right person to walk in." Maya's heart skipped. She tried to laugh it off, but her voice trembled just slightly. "That's a very poetic thing for a businessman to say." He smiled. "Then maybe I'm finally learning what poetry feels like." The rain deepened outside, painting streaks of silver down the window. The cafe glowed like a safe harbor in a restless world, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel like a CEO. He felt human, grounded. He told her about his life, not the press release version, but the real one. How success had stolen his peace. How the people around him applauded him, yet none truly knew him. And as he spoke, his voice carried an ache that Mia felt in her bones. Without realizing, she reached across the counter, her fingers gently brushing his hand. "Then maybe," she said softly, "you were never looking for success. You were looking for home." His breath caught. The warmth of her touch lingered like a promise he didn't know he needed. Outside, thunder rolled gently. Inside, the clock ticked past midnight, but neither of them moved. Their coffee had gone cold, yet their hearts burned with something new, something fragile and dangerous. When he finally stood to leave, the air between them felt electric. He looked at her with that same steady gaze, the kind that didn't ask but confessed. "Tomorrow?" he asked. Her lips parted. "I'll keep the lights on," she whispered. He smiled, the kind of smile that belonged not to a stranger, but to someone who'd just found a reason to stay. As the door closed behind him, Maya leaned against the counter, her pulse racing. She didn't understand what this was, or where it would lead. But she knew one thing: some connections aren't accidents. They're invitations from fate. Outside, the rain softened to a hush, as if the world itself had paused to listen. And beneath the golden glow of the cafe lights, a story was no longer beginning, it was unfolding. The third night came dressed in quiet rain and golden lights. Café Verona had become more than a workplace to Mia. It had become a waiting place. Each passing hour was a heartbeat closer to the moment she secretly longed for. The moment the door would open, and he would walk in, and just as the clock whispered 11:50, the bell above the door chimed. Ethan stepped in again, this time without an umbrella. The drizzle clung to his dark hair, his shirt slightly undone beneath a gray wool coat. He looked both powerful and undone, as if the city itself had tried to hold him back but failed. Mia looked up, her breath catching softly. "You're late tonight." He smiled, that half smile that had started to haunt her dreams. "Traffic," he said, his voice low. "And maybe hesitation." "Hesitation?" she asked, tilting her head. "I wasn't sure if coming here again would make it harder to leave." For a moment, the world stilled. The only sound was the faint hum of the espresso machine and the steady rhythm of the rain. "Then, quietly," she said, "then maybe you shouldn't try to leave at all." He looked at her, and in that look, the distance between them vanished. This time, he didn't wait for her to offer. He walked behind the counter, his presence close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating off him. "Let me help," he said softly. "You make coffee," she teased, laughing lightly. "Teach me," he said, his voice deep, sincere. "Teach me something simple." So she did. She guided his hands to the portafilter, showing him how to measure, tamp, and lock it into place. His fingers brushed hers once, then again, each touch lingering longer than the last. The air thickened, scented with roasted beans and something sweeter, something unnamed. "Now," she said, her voice softer than the steam hissing from the machine, "you wait until it's perfect." Ethan wasn't looking at the cup. His eyes were on her. "I think it already is." Mia froze, the warmth of his words crawling up her neck. She turned away, pretending to focus on the coffee, but her pulse betrayed her calm. They stood close enough to share a breath, close enough that the air between them trembled. When the coffee was ready, she poured it into 2 porcelain cups, the light glimmering over the surface like liquid gold. "Congratulations," she said with a faint smile. "Your first cup of real coffee." He took a sip, grimaced slightly. "It's terrible." Her laugh filled the room, soft, melodic, the kind of laugh that could heal. "I didn't say you'd be good at it." Ethan smiled, watching her laugh, realizing he hadn't seen anything so unguarded in years. "Then maybe I'll keep practicing. If you'll let me." She leaned on the counter, teasing. "Are you asking for lessons or excuses to come back?" "Maybe both," he said, and this time, his tone carried something raw, truth wrapped in charm. For a moment, they were just there, lost in the flicker of candlelight and quiet yearning. The city outside blurred into rain, but inside the cafe, everything felt in slow motion. The clinking of cups, the rhythm of their breath, the magnetic pull of 2 souls finding their reflection in each other. Then Ethan said quietly, "You know, I've been to countless meetings, signed $1 million deals, but nothing feels as real as this." Maya's gaze softened. "Maybe because this doesn't come with contracts or expectations." He took a step closer. "Then what does it come with?" She hesitated, her lips parting just slightly. "Courage," she whispered, "and a little bit of risk." He smiled, his voice dropping low. "I think I'm ready for both." For a long, fragile moment, they just stood there. The distance between them was now only measured in heartbeats. The clock ticked toward midnight, but neither of them moved. When the wind outside grew stronger, she turned to close the window. Ethan reached out, his hand brushing her wrist to help. The touch lingered, warm, steady, deliberate. Their eyes met and the world tilted. She didn't pull away. He didn't speak. The air between them hummed with something dangerous yet beautiful. Like the first breath before a storm. Finally, she whispered, "You should go before I forget this is just coffee." His lips curved faintly. "And if I want you to forget." Maya's heart raced, but her voice stayed calm. "Then you'll have to make better coffee next time." He laughed softly, a sound like velvet and rain. He reached into his pocket and placed a folded napkin on the counter. "Tomorrow," he said, "same time." When he left, she unfolded the napkin. In his neat handwriting were 3 words, "Don't turn off." She smiled to herself, realizing he didn't mean the lights. He meant her warmth, her presence, her spark. That night Mia didn't dream of fairy tales. She dreamed of a man in a gray coat drenched in rain, who had found home in a cafe's glow and in her. Outside, the rain kept falling, whispering softly against the windows. Inside, the cafe held the faint echo of laughter, 2 untouched cups, and the first traces of something that was no longer coincidence. It was beginning to feel like destiny. The fourth night arrived like a secret, a quiet symphony of rain, wind, and the kind of anticipation that makes time move slower. The city outside gleamed under 1,000 lights, but inside Café Verona, it was a world apart, glowing in amber hues and soft candlelight. Maya stood by the counter, her fingers brushing against the edge of her cup, her reflection shimmering in the glass. She told herself she was only waiting to close up, yet her heart betrayed her. Every second felt suspended, a fragile thread between hope and fear. And then, as though the universe had heard her heartbeat, the bell above the door chimed. Ethan stepped in, dressed not in his usual suit, but in a dark charcoal coat, his collar damp with rain. His presence filled the cafe, soft yet commanding. His eyes found hers instantly, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. "You're here," she said softly. "I told you," he murmured, a slow smile tugging at his lips. "I'd keep coming until you told me to stop." She smiled, shaking her head. "I'm not sure I ever will." He walked closer, every step deliberate, as if drawn by something neither of them could explain. Tonight he didn't sit at his usual table. He stood right across from her at the counter, his gaze steady, his tone quiet, but filled with unspoken emotion. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "why the right people show up when you stop expecting anything at all?" Mia tilted her head, her eyes searching his. "Because that's when you finally see what's been missing." He nodded slightly, his gaze lowering for a moment before meeting hers again. "I've spent years building empires, chasing perfection, trying to silence the emptiness. But somehow peace found me here, in a small cafe, in your silence, in your laughter." Her heart trembled. She didn't know what to say, so she poured coffee instead. The sound of the liquid filling the cup was almost soothing, grounding her, even as her pulse raced. When she handed him the cup, his fingers brushed hers, warm, strong, deliberate. Neither pulled away. He held her gaze as he whispered, "I don't think I came here for coffee anymore." The words hung between them like the rain outside. Soft, steady, unavoidable. Mia's breath caught. "Then why do you come?" Ethan's voice was low, intimate. "For the way you look at the world and at me. For the peace I feel here. For you." The air thickened with emotion, heavy and delicate all at once. She looked down, her heart pounding in her chest. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why?" he asked gently. "Because they make it harder to pretend." He smiled faintly. "Then let's stop pretending." He took a slow step forward, closing the space between them. The scent of rain clung to him, mingling with the warmth of espresso and vanilla. His hand reached out, lightly brushing a strand of hair from her face, the touch so soft it made her shiver. "Mia," he said, her name falling from his lips like a prayer. "I don't know what this is, or where it leads, but every time I leave, it feels wrong. Every time I walk away, I want to turn back." Her eyes shimmered in the dim light. "You don't belong in my world," she whispered. "You have a life. People who need you, a future that doesn't stop here at midnight. Maybe I don't want that life anymore," he said, his voice raw. "Maybe what I need is something real, something that doesn't come with contracts or titles." The rain grew heavier, tapping against the glass like a soft rhythm beneath their words. Mia turned away for a moment, trying to steady herself, but Ethan stepped closer. Close enough that his warmth surrounded her, close enough that she could feel his heartbeat echoing her own. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "So am I," he replied, "but I'd rather be afraid with you than safe without you." When she looked up, his gaze held hers with quiet intensity. A question, a promise, a plea. And then, slowly, she reached out. Her fingers touched his chest, feeling the rise and fall of his breath. He covered her hand with his, holding it there, anchoring her, grounding her in that fragile, perfect moment. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them said everything words could not. He finally lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. Reverent, deliberate, filled with emotion too deep to name. "Tell me not to come back," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "And I'll never walk through that door again." Maya's throat tightened. Her eyes glistened as she whispered back, "I couldn't say that even if I tried." A small smile broke through his restraint, one of relief, one of surrender. He leaned in just slightly, his breath brushing her ear as he murmured, "Then I'll see you tomorrow." And before she could reply, he turned and walked into the rain. The bell chiming softly behind him, echoing like the last note of a song, Mia stood there long after he'd gone, her hand still trembling where he'd kissed it. Outside the rain poured harder, but inside, her world had never felt so alive. That night, she didn't close the cafe right away. She left the lights on, just in case the rain brought him back. The fifth night arrived like a dream, the kind that feels too real to fade and too fragile to touch. The city glowed beneath a curtain of mist, its rhythm slowed by rain that hadn't stopped since dusk. Inside Café Verona, the lights were dimmed, warm and golden. The scent of roasted beans lingered, mixing with the faint perfume of blooming jasmine Mia had placed near the window that morning. She told herself she didn't know why, but deep down she did. She was waiting. For him, for Ethan. The bell above the door chimed softly, and she didn't even need to look up. She felt him before she saw him, the familiar calm that entered the room like gravity finding its center. He stood there for a moment, water dripping from his coat, his eyes fixed on her as though every storm he'd walked through had led him here. "You're soaked," Mia said softly, stepping from behind the counter. "I didn't want to be late," he replied, his voice warm, deep, edged with something vulnerable. She smiled gently and handed him a towel. Their fingers brushed, a simple touch, yet it carried the weight of every night they had spent circling the edge of something neither dared to name. When he dried his hair, she poured 2 cups of coffee, one black, one with cream, the way he'd learned she liked it. They sat at their usual table by the window, the rain casting ripples of light across their faces. Neither spoke for a while. Words felt unnecessary. The silence between them had already become its own language. Finally, Ethan broke it. "I cancelled a meeting in London," he said, his tone steady but low. The board wasn't happy. The Mia looked at him curious. "Why would you do that?" He met her gaze, steady, unwavering. "Because I realized something. I've spent years chasing everything I was told mattered. Power, prestige, control. But none of it made me feel alive. This does." Her breath caught. "Ethan." He reached across the table, his hand brushing hers, his thumb tracing the edge of her fingers. "Every night I walk in here, the world feels softer. You make everything slow down. The noise, the pressure, the pretending." Maya's heart pounded, the warmth of his touch spreading like a tide. "You shouldn't say things you'll regret." He shook his head. "I'll regret every word I don't say." Outside, thunder rolled softly, but inside time itself seemed to still. Ethan stood, coming around to her side of the table. His eyes never left hers. "I told myself I came here for coffee," he said, his voice barely a whisper now. "But the truth is I came for you." Mia looked up at him, her eyes glistening in the low light. "And what happens when the CEO leaves and the girl from the cafe disappears into his world like a passing chapter?" He knelt beside her, his hand resting gently over hers. "Then maybe I'll build a new world where she belongs. I don't want a chapter, Mia. I want a story, ours." Tears glimmered in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the beauty of hearing what she'd never dared to hope for. "You don't even know what I'm running from," she whispered. He smiled softly. "I don't need to. I just need to know where you want to go. And if it's forward, I'll walk beside you." Maya stood, her hand still in his. They moved toward the window, the city lights reflecting in the glass. 2 silhouettes framed by golden warmth and silver rain. For a long moment they simply stood there, listening to the rain's lullaby. Then, quietly, she said, "You make me forget everything that hurt." He turned toward her, his gaze deep, tender, unwavering. "Then maybe I was sent to remind you that you deserve more than hurt." And before she could reply, he leaned in, slow, deliberate, a breath apart. His hand rose to her cheek, thumb tracing her jawline, as though memorizing her. When his lips finally met hers, the world outside ceased to exist. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant, reverent, as if afraid to shatter something sacred. But it deepened, growing warmer, more certain, until it felt like everything they had never said was pouring through that single moment. The cafe around them faded into the soft hum of rain, the glow of candlelight flickering like stars around their entwined shadows. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his chest, her breath trembling. "I don't know what happens next," she whispered. Ethan smiled against her hair, his voice soft and sure. "Then we'll find out, one coffee at a time." Mia laughed quietly, the sound mingling with the rain and the hum of the espresso machine. It felt like music. The kind that doesn't fade, only lingers. He kissed the top of her head, his arms wrapping around her as though the world outside no longer mattered. For the first time in years, Mia didn't feel alone. She didn't feel small. She felt seen, truly, deeply seen. And Ethan, the man who had built a kingdom of glass and gold, finally felt something real enough to shatter every wall he'd ever built. As dawn crept into the sky, the cafe glowed brighter, bathed in soft light. The rain had stopped, but their hearts were still racing, alive, awakened, intertwined. The world outside began its busy rhythm again, but inside Café Verona, time held its breath, guarding their secret, their beginning. For love had walked in at midnight, disguised as a stranger asking for one last coffee, and neither of them ever wanted it to end. As dawn spilled over the city, the world outside Café Verona awoke, but inside, two souls had already found their morning long before the sun did. The night that began with a cup of coffee had turned into something sacred, a quiet revolution of hearts. Ethan, the man who once measured time in meetings, mergers, and money, finally discovered the one thing he could never buy: peace. And Mia, the woman who had hidden her light behind the safety of routine, found the courage to step into her own warmth. They didn't need grand declarations or diamond promises. Sometimes, love doesn't roar, it hums softly in the space between two heartbeats, in a shared glance, in a whispered, "Stay." What began as a midnight encounter between a weary billionaire and a dreamer behind a counter became a story about rediscovery. About how love finds us not when we're ready, but when we're real. The cafe that once closed at midnight stayed open that night, not for business but for love. Because love doesn't follow hours. It doesn't wait for the perfect timing. It arrives like the first sip of coffee after a long storm, warm, deep, and unforgettable. And so, as the city moved on, they stayed, two hearts learning the rhythm of forever, one cup, one touch, one sunrise at a time. In the end, it was never just about coffee. It was about finding the one person who makes you feel like home, even in a world that never stops moving.